Good morning and welcome to this webinar brought to you by BASF and Golf Course Industry. I'm Golf Course Industry Senior Editor Matt Lowell. You will not hear from me very long. You're going to hear, while you're here, for most of this webinar from Emma Lukabaugh, Technical Service Specialist with BASF Professional and Specialty Solutions. We're going to talk all about fall weed defense. I'm going to give Emma a real quick intro, and then you're going to hear a lot of a great presentation. Emma Lukabaugh, again, Technical Service Specialist with BASF Professional and Specialty Solution, works in field development for BASF's Turf and Ornamentals Division. She's a graduate of NC State University, go Wolfpack, with a bachelor's in plant biology and biological sciences and a master's and a PhD in plant pathology. Her experience includes almost a decade as a lab technician and diagnostician in the plant disease and insect clinic at NC State University. She also works as a seed production scientist with BASF Vegetable Seeds. Based in the Southeast, right near the Triangle, Emma now supports golf course superintendents, ornamental growers, and lawn care operators with proven, field-tested solutions from BASF's line of plant protection products. She also works closely with university cooperators and private consultants to develop research-driven recommendations and IPM programs to ensure maximum success of those products for years and years to come. Emma, the floor is yours. Let's talk about fall weed defense.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for logging on today. All right, let's get advanced here. All right. There we go. All right, so today we're going to talk about shifting seasons with Tower and Pylex herbicides. So our weed control strategies need to shift, not only as we move through the seasons and encounter changing weed pressure, but also in terms of our approach to controlling some of the more challenging weeds. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about how you can use Tower and Pylex herbicides summer through the fall to maximize control of your troublesome weeds. So things like crabgrass, goosegrass, and even herbicide-resistant annua. So we're going to cover ideal application timings, and then we'll spend a lot of time talking about some of the more proven tank mix options for enhanced weed control in both cool season and warm season turf types. So Pylex has long been the selective herbicide of choice when it comes to grassy weed control and cool season turf grass stands. But Pylex isn't only for cool season turf. So with a little finesse and careful attention to detail, and when I say detail, I mean pay close attention to the rates, and then a few tank mix options, really Pylex can also be an important tool for managing things like goosegrass in warm season turf types. And because the reality is, goosegrass is quickly becoming the next annua when it comes to control challenges. Speaking of POA, we'll spend the second half of the presentation talking about how you can enhance your POA control with Tower herbicide. And so it's definitely underutilized and it's incredibly effective when you use it properly. So first half, we'll talk about Pylex. Second half, we're going to talk about Tower. All right, so Pylex herbicide. What is it? So Pylex delivers powerful post-action, so unmatched control of difficult to eliminate target weeds, including goosegrass, bermudagrass. You have flexible utility across both cool and warm season turf types. There's a no-wait reseeding schedule. And so all of these things really make Pylex sort of that ultimate tank mix partner for enhanced control of grassy weeds, but also bring some broadleaf weed protection as well. So Pylex group 27 herbicide, tepramazone is the active ingredient. When it comes to seasonal annual maximums, you get 4 fluid ounces. And so that's going to be important when we talk about bermudagrass control because you will use the maximum amount when we're trying to take out bermudagrass. So Pylex is absorbed by the leaves primarily, but also taken up by the roots and shoots, and it's translocated into the growing points of susceptible weeds. So Pylex controls weeds by blocking the HPPD enzyme, and that's an enzyme that's essential for carotenoid biosynthesis. And so carotenoids are essential plant pigments that protect chlorophyll from photooxidation. And so soon after application with Pylex, those treated weeds are going to turn white because the chlorophyll is quickly oxidized and then it's destroyed by the light. And so that results in that characteristic bleaching symptom that you're going to see when you use Pylex. And then the new growth is going to turn white. And so over time, that bleached tissue actually becomes necrotic, and then the plant will typically die within 7 to 14 days. And so you'll very quickly start seeing that bleach symptom, and then it could take a little bit to actually kill the plant. So tolerant turf grasses are actually able to rapidly detoxify this herbicide through enhanced metabolism. And so the speed and then the efficiency of their detoxification differs significantly across plant species. So tolerant turf grasses metabolize tepramazone quickly, and so it prevents it from reaching that critical concentration at its site of action. So essentially, they're going to inactivate the herbicide before we see lethal damage, but you still may see some of that bleaching. And then, whereas susceptible weeds, obviously, they lack that metabolic capability, and so they're going to actually succumb to the Pylex effects. The other thing is that enzyme I talked about, the HPPD4 enzyme. So in some of our tolerant turfgrass species, they're actually just less inherently sensitive to tepramazone. So we do see that differential sensitivity across different turf types, and then even sometimes across cultivars within turf types. And so as I show you pictures throughout the presentation, you're going to see that variability in the whitening effect and the bleaching effect. And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how that differs when we go from cool season turf types to warm season turf types, and then how we can try to mitigate some of that bleach as well. But it's rapidly absorbed, and Pylex is also highly selective. And so that's why we can use Pylex to take out certain grass types in other turf grass stands. All right, so like I said, Pylex is absorbed primarily through the leaves, roots, and shoots, quickly targets the target weeds, quickly controls the target weeds. We have that flexible use rate on the label, and so that gives us improved tolerance across turf types. So whether we're going on cool season turf types, we'll use the higher rates on the label. And then if we're going on more marginally tolerant species like bermudagrass and some of our warm season turf types, we're going to use the lower end of the rate ranges. We also see increased seasonal utility. And so when we talk about when to use Pylex, you're going to see a couple key timings when Pylex makes an ideal partner in your tank. It also has a no-wait reseeding interval. And so this is really good, particularly when we're talking about Pylex applications on cool season turf types, because we can use Pylex up until the point of reseeding. So you can actually seed into Pylex immediately without having to wait. So that gives us a lot of flexibility as we start talking about Bermuda grass removal, kind of that late summer timing. And so we can use Pylex in a variety of ways. Looking at our tolerant turf types, so cool season turf grass is definitely more tolerant to Pylex than our warm season turf types. So you can see the list here. So cool season grasses like Kentucky bluegrass, your fescues, perennial ryegrass, those are all tolerant. One thing that's also interesting that people forget a lot is that centipede grass is also highly tolerant to Pylex. When it comes to some of our marginally tolerant, this means that these turf types, you are going to see some discoloration. You're going to see increased whitening and increased bleaching on these turf types, especially as you bump the rates up. And so for these turf types, we really are going to stay at the lowest end of the rates. So things like creeping bentgrass when it comes to cool season types, but then your Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, and even seashore paspalum, we're going to have to be on the lower end of the rate range. And I'll get into the details of that here in a minute. All right, so Pylex has long kind of been coined the Swiss Army knife of herbicides, and that is because we can do a lot of different things with Pylex. So we can take out bermudagrass from cool season stands. It's super active on goosegrass in both cool and warm season turfgrass stands. We see improved crabgrass control. It has activity on broadleaf weeds. So all of these things make it a premium tank mix partner. And so that really allows us to use it throughout the year whenever we need added control. Nice weed spectrum, so primarily grassy weeds, but then also picks up a number of broadleaf weeds as well. And so again, you can boost your control depending on what you pair it with in a tank mix. But for the most part, we'd like to use Pylex for goosegrass, and then Bermuda grass control are the two biggest things that we use Pylex for. All right, so here are the main ways that we're going to use it. So in the summer, we're targeting grassy weeds like crabgrass, goosegrass, even Dallas grass, other paspalum species. And then when we tank mix it with other broadleaves, we can just boost the control of your broadleaf species. Pylex is one of the best herbicides to control goosegrass, if not the best herbicide to control goosegrass. It is incredibly effective on goosegrass. So if you struggle with goosegrass, definitely consider Pylex in your mixture. Once we get towards the end of the summer, kind of coming up right about now, that's when we start applying Pylex to actually remove Bermuda grass from cool season stands. And so that's going to take repeat applications, and I'll go into the details of that here in a second. But so you have a variety of ways that you can use it. Whenever you apply Pylex, we always recommend adding an adjuvant like MSO to the spray solution, because that's going to significantly increase absorption and help the herbicide actually penetrate that leaf tissue. So you're going to get better control when you put the MSO with it. So that's especially important with certain weed species that we're targeting. It's going to give us better control. This is also really important as we start moving into that later part of the season, as we start moving into fall and you're doing Pylex applications, because the uptake and also the translocation of Pylex under low light intensity and low temperatures decreases a bit. So putting an adjuvant with it is going to help that a little bit. Also, you might bump the rates up as you move towards the end of the season to get better control, again, to kind of account for some of that decrease in translocation as your temperatures cool down. All right, so let's talk about goosegrass first, because, I know we're kind of not exactly in the ideal timing for goosegrass, but it's very relevant for our summer applications. And Pylex pretty much is like napalm on goosegrass. Goosegrass rapidly absorbs the herbicide much more readily than other grassy weeds. And so it's super susceptible to Pylex, even at extremely low use rates. And so when you are using Pylex, you have to pay very close attention to the use rates and what you're actually putting in the tank, because probably the number one thing that happens with Pylex is people overshoot the amount they put in the jug, and they end up going out way higher than they should have gone out. And that is because it takes such a small amount of Pylex to be effective. So if you have like a straight goosegrass stand, this is what Pylex does. It kills all of it and it takes it out, and you're left with bare ground. And so obviously, depending on how much goosegrass you have, this can be pretty unsightly because it's very effective. So look at the use rates there, though. That's 0.5 ounces per acre, not 0.5 per thousand, 0.5 ounces per acre. And so especially if there's anybody, maybe like lawn care operators and stuff like that, that are mixing up smaller tanks or even spot spray tanks, so small tanks, it is a tiny amount that goes in that tank when we're talking about those types of applications. And so pay very close attention to that. Here we have just again talking about how effective it is on at extremely low use rates. And so this is on some cool season turf grass. You can see we looked at both the 0.25 ounces per acre and then 0.5 ounces per acre, both of which provide excellent control of goosegrass. And so if you're on, creeping bent grass or you are on your warm season species, we're going to be at that really low end of the rate range to control goosegrass. We don't actually need more than that. And sometimes even if you go to 0.25, you may do a second application, but for a lot of times we can actually, get pretty good control even with just one. And that kind of brings us to, when we start talking about Pylex on warm season turf grass, the thing to remember here is that the dose and actually even the timing is what makes the poison. And so we need to pay careful attention to those rates. I can't say it enough because if you shift too far, that kind of we end up in that territory of injuring the Bermuda grass or even get into that territory of trying to remove it. And so if you're going out with Pylex to control goosegrass or other grassy weeds in the summer, you want to make sure you stick to sort of the middle of the summer for those applications so that Bermuda grass has plenty of time to recover and is still actively growing and has plenty of time to recover before our temperatures start cooling down. Because as we move into the fall, the Bermuda grass will not be able to recover as easily. And so that's where you'll start seeing lasting injury from those applications. So keep these apps to when it's hot in the middle of the summer and your Bermuda is actively growing. All right. So you can do the spot spray approach with Pylex, but obviously you're going to see some polka dots if you do that because while Bermuda grass can metabolize tepromazone, it is definitely considered sensitive and can show significant foliar bleaching. So the higher the rate you go, the longer or the more bleached the desirable turf is going to be, especially if you don't use any kind of mitigation measures. Also, if you have turf grass that's already under stress, so high heat, drought stress, all of those types of stress are going to show more injury potentially to Pylex, even if you're applying Pylex to, a tolerant grass type. All right, so the thing to remember about Pylex on warm season turf, so if we're applying Pylex to Bermuda grass or even zoysia grass, you will start seeing the whitening, start seeing the bleach within the first week. But what we say peak bleach, meaning the worst of the whitening, usually hits somewhere between 12 to 14 days. And then you could have another couple weeks before that whitening is completely gone. So depending on what rate you use and whether you go solo or tank mix, you could be off color for 2 to 4 weeks potentially. And so you have to set up for that. And so some courses are obviously not going to tolerate that off color, but a lot of courses, because goosegrass is becoming so difficult to control and so challenging to control, they are actually willing to accept that off color to take out the goosegrass and be done with it. And so we have spent a lot of time over the years looking at ways to mitigate and reduce the whitening on warm season turf grass. Things to remember: use of like colorants and pigments or even certain fertility sources like iron sources. In some situations, that's really only shown like marginal reduction in the bleaching, so they're really not overly effective. The colorants are for sure not overly effective. And the reason why colorants don't work is because it's a pixel issue. So when you're talking about something that is white versus something that's brown and you're trying to mask that, you need way more pixels or colorant to turn something white green versus something brown green. And so whenever we have used colorants, it does not mask the bleaching. So that's, we've done that, tried that, and was not overly effective. The most effective options for reducing the bleaching effects are tank mixtures with other herbicides. And so we have looked at a bunch of tank mixes over the years. Some are more effective than others when we're talking about warm season turf types. And some of these tank mixtures have their own baggage, though. So you got to remember that as well. But some that have been most effective at reducing the bleach are Pylex plus Celsius or Tribute Total, Pylex plus Speed Zone, and then Pylex plus Sencor. So all of those are very effective at reducing whitening. And you can see that in this chart. It's a little confusing, but basically each column was a different tank mixture. And then across the rows, those were actually different nutrient sources, but they didn't really make a huge difference. So pay attention just to the columns. And so we have a variety of mixtures here, and you can see, the Pylex alone, even at 0.25, clearly a lot of whitening, a lot of bleach effect there. Whereas the mixtures, whether it's Speed Zone, Sencor, or even the like Celsius and Tribute Total mixtures, significantly less bleaching. Another very popular mix is to put Pylex with Drive Accelerate. And that definitely does reduce the bleaching, but maybe not as much as some of the other mixtures like Sencor or Celsius would, or even Speed Zone. And so kind of keep that in the back of your head. So it really depends, what weed you're targeting, or if you're just trying to reduce the bleaching, because obviously some of these bring other things to the table than just goosegrass control. The other thing to remember is, yes, while it might reduce the bleaching, sometimes you may have to worry about, other types of injury with the tank mix partners. So like Sencor can be a little hot on its own. So you just got to kind of think about that. And when you pick rates, make sure you're picking rates that kind of work together and you're not getting like one, increasing your injury outside of just the whitening. So these have all been really effective. Another thing we've been playing with recently to sort of reduce some of that whitening effect is actually looking at Pylex in combination with certain PGRs. So even things like Primo or Trim It, we've kind of looked at those because basically it slows the growth of your desirable turf grass. So it's not absorbing as much of the Pylex. And so then we don't see as much of the bleach effect because the part of the turf grass plant that most readily absorbs the Pylex is the new growth, the actively growing meristematic tissue. And so if you're not actively growing, you're not absorbing as much. So therefore you don't have as white or as much of a bleach effect. And I'll show some pictures of that here in a second. But Pylex on its own, super effective. You don't actually need a tank mix to control goosegrass. The tank mix is coming from, let's try to reduce that bleaching or that whitening effect. But if you're okay with the whitening effect, just do Pylex. It's incredibly effective by itself to control goosegrass. So these mixtures are really for if you just can't tolerate the whitening. So here's some data. Every couple years there's like a favorite tank mix, and the last couple years Sencor and Pylex was a real popular tank mix. Everyone was doing it. And this is kind of some of the expectations of what you'll see. So you don't actually need the high rates. So you can see here the first two bars, that's Pylex at 0.25 plus Sencor at 8 ounces. The next two is the Pylex at 0.25 and Sencor at 4. And you can see there's no difference in control. So even going the low rates of both of those are still incredibly effective. And then compare that to, a high rate of Pylex alone or a high rate of Sencor alone, and you can see the difference there. So yes, there's a benefit to the tank mixture, but you don't have to go crazy with it. You don't have to use the highest rates of both. This is, some of the whitening that you can expect. And so this is, what those tank mixtures can bring to the table. So on the left, that is solo Pylex application. So that's Pylex at the 0.5. So really when it comes to bermudagrass or even zoysia grass, I would not go above 0.5 Pylex. It pretty much gives you all you need in terms of goosegrass control. So that's the 0.5 of Pylex, very white, very bleached, okay? The middle treatment is Pylex at 0.25 plus Celsius. And then we also added Tower to that tank, and we added Tower to give some residual protection. Because basically we pretty much always recommend if you go out with a postemergent, you can put Tower in the tank and give you some residual control. So massively reduce the amount of bleaching that you see with that application without sacrificing the control, the goosegrass control. We're still getting excellent goosegrass control. And then you can see all the way on the right, that was the Pylex plus the speed zone. And so again, much less bleaching, much more acceptable application. So for these, you could even go probably more than one application if you needed to without massively increasing the amount of time your turf grass is off color. Also, another thing people have done is try to use irrigation to reduce the bleaching effect. And so that definitely will work if you irrigate immediately. But basically, those sprinklers have to be running while you're making that application. Because if it dries at all or absorbs into the desirable turf grass, you're going to see off colors. So even within the first 15 minutes, if it goes past 15 minutes, you're still going to bleach the turf. And so that's not always practical to get the water out, quick enough. And the other flip side of that is whenever you put a bunch of water behind it, you are going to reduce your weed control. So you definitely may need to do, sequential applications. So sometimes you may only see like 20-25% reduction in weed control. And then other times you may see, just like no control by irrigating. And so it really varies on location. But irrigation can definitely help reduce the bleaching if you irrigate immediately. So this is another one of those trials just showing the differences here. So you have the no irrigation, that's on the left. So the P is Pylex and the S is Sencor. So we're comparing Pylex alone to Pylex plus Sencor and then the effects of irrigation. So you can see there, as you go with the immediate irrigation, we were able to reduce that bleaching significantly. And then even if you waited 15 minutes or 30 minutes, you're still going to see that whitening effect. So irrigation isn't necessarily the best choice, one, because you're compromising your weed control, but then also it may not even be overly effective depending on how quickly you get the water out. So I mentioned we've been messing around a little bit with PGRs to reduce that bleach effect, and we've been pretty successful with that. So we've looked at, just PGRs before you make the Pylex application and then at the time of the Pylex application. It works a little bit better if it's prior to that because those plants are growth regulated, so then they're not rapidly absorbing it. But this is sort of the difference here. So on the left, we had Pylex at 0.5 fluid ounces. We also irrigated that, and you can see it's still bleached pretty significantly, even with the irrigation. And then on the right, that was Pylex plus Trimit. And we had way less bleaching with that PGR program. And so that photo is taken 2 weeks after the Pylex or the second Pylex application. And then this is the photo 2 weeks later. So you can see, kind of you reach peak bleach in 2 weeks, and then it can take another little bit of time for that whitening to go away. But what I will say is the whitening, for the most part, does go away. People get really scared when your fairways are snow white, but it will go away because, like you'll see in a minute, it takes a lot to actually kill bermudagrass, right? This is some of the data, basically. So if you add that irrigation, you really do need that second application before you see control. It's slower to control it with the irrigation. And so you need higher rates to achieve the same level of control. So just kind of remember that. I also, just like as a tidbit, don't focus on one weed species and let another one go crazy. So, the picture on the left is basically we controlled the goosegrass, but then we forgot that we also had doveweed, and all of a sudden you have doveweed everywhere. And so if you're using something like Pylex plus Sencor for goosegrass, that's why I say put Tower in the tank too, so that you get some residual pre-emergent activity against some of the weeds that start germinating later in the season. And so that makes a really good mix to kind of give you complete protection. All right, so cool season turf grass, but also warm season turf grass. I mentioned drive, accelerate plus Pylex. And so this has kind of been coined pile driver. It's a very effective tank mix. It reduces the bleaching. You get more effective control of crabgrass, especially during that 2 to 4 tiller stage. It's a broader spectrum than using each of those active ingredients or each of those products alone. And so depending on if we're going on warm versus cool season turf, we can titrate those rates to make sense. And so you have a lot of flexibility to, increase one or decrease one for what works for you. For the most part, when we're going out on warm season turf grass, we might be in that more 0.25 to 0.5 Pylex, and then plus your drive accelerate. And then on cool season turf, we can bump our Pylex rates up a little bit. If you're trying for perennial grass control and cool season stands, especially like late in the season, like now, you may even want to bump that Pylex rate up to 1.5 ounces. And then also give that full rate of drive. And that's just going to give you better control because, again, as our temps start cooling down, we just start losing a little bit of control. Also, don't forget to always put your high quality MSO in the tank as well. So here's just showing you, that combination, excellent control, better control than the solos. And so it's a really great mix. You also have a lot of flexibility for these applications. This is more so for the lawn care side of things, where we're looking at this mix in different sprayers, and pretty much we get really good control with pile driver across the board, consistent crabgrass control. And a lot of that comes from mixing two very effective products together, and you're still going to get excellent control. So that was just kind of showing some flexibility there. Another real popular tank mix with Pylex is Pylex plus Turflawn. So obviously this is a cool season tank mix. You can't put that on warm season turf grass. And so this particular picture is a crabgrass trial, but what I'm showing is how Turflawn can reduce the bleaching significantly. So obviously Turflawn doesn't really do anything for crabgrass, but when you put them together, if you needed like broadleaf weed control, and that's why you're using Turflawn, you're going to get considerably less bleaching. And so that's what you see here. Pylex alone, you can see considerable bleach. Turflawn, no bleaching. And then the Pylex plus Turflawn definitely reduced that bleach. And so if you want added broadleaf control, you can use that tank mixture. That tank mixture is also the go-to recommendation when we are actually trying to remove bermudagrass from cool season turf. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. So switch gears in your head, because now we're talking about applications that are not safe for bermudagrass. And this is to actually remove bermudagrass from cool season stands with Pylex. And so to do this, you need repeat applications, sometimes over multiple years, to completely remove it. But you can get selective removal of bermudagrass from cool season stands. And to do this, we make sequential applications of that tank mixture. And so you're going to initiate that first application kind of in that late summer, early fall timing. Really, you pick the timing that's about 6 to 9 weeks prior to when you want to overseed or reseed. And so that's going to give you enough time to get rid of the Bermuda and then seed into that last Pylex application. So as those temperatures cool down, the Bermuda growth is slowing down. And so the Pylex is staying in the plant longer, and it then is more injurious and more effective. And so if you try to do this in the middle of the summer, it will not work. The Bermuda will metabolize it and it won't kill it. So you do have to wait until your temperatures start cooling down to start the program. And it definitely takes multiple applications. So this same program that we use for Bermuda grass removal, we can also use to remove zoysia grass from cool season stands as well. We always recommend combining this program with overseeding, especially if we're talking about tall fescue. And so that summer heat, the potential for disease makes your fescue weak and less competitive for Bermuda grass. So if you overseed right behind it, that gives you better competition so that the Bermuda grass, does not or succumbs more easily to the program. Things to remember: the turf lawn label says you can't reseed 21 days after the application. And so typically for this program, we put turf lawn in the first 2 apps and then just leave the turf lawn out of the last application, because you can make the Pylex app and then immediately reseed into it. And so that's, again, a lot of that flexibility that you have with it. All right, so here's just some pictures before and after. So yes, selective removal, it's a nice option for that. Same with if we're trying to selectively remove zoysia from a cool season stand. And so this was right after the application, we start seeing the yellowing, and then over time that takes it out. If you have more than 50% Bermuda, that's when you need to start thinking about a non-selective option as opposed to Pylex, or at least including that non-selective in the tank. And so that's basically because we just don't have any competition. So if it's 100% Bermuda grass, it's just not going to be as effective. And so in those situations, you can do Pylex with Roundup or something like glyphosate to improve the control of the Bermuda grass. So again, in areas where you have more than 50% that is Bermuda grass and you're trying to kill it, the non-selective route is a little bit more effective. So in addition to, goose and Bermuda grass, we can also use Pylex to remove other grassy weeds. So things like Dallas grass, some of the paspalum species. It's very effective. So Pylex, jack of all trades. All right, the next little bit, I'm going to talk about POA and specifically Tower. So Tower is a pre-emergent herbicide that we can use in late spring, early summer to control summer grassy weeds, things like yellow nut sedge, and then we can use it in the fall to control Poa annua. Cool things about Tower: it's a shoot inhibitor. It's not a root inhibitor. So you don't have to worry about those root pruning effects like some of the DNAs or things like spectacle. So you can safely use Tower even in sandy soils without the risk of root injury. It's non-staining. It's a liquid, so that gives us a lot of flexibility with how we can tank mix it with other herbicides. And then it also is nice because it doesn't have to be watered in immediately, like say Ronstar does. We get reliable activation or irrigation, reliable activation with irrigation or rain within 7 to 10 days. Obviously, the quicker you can irrigate, the better. We do recommend light irrigation immediately following the app, just to get it off the foliage and to activate that, that weed barrier. So it's a group 15 herbicide, and you have an annual maximum of 64 fluid ounces. And so when we think about ways to use it, kind of keep that in mind as well. All right, so it's non-burning, not a root inhibitor, and it's largely been underutilized when it comes to POA. And so that's going to be really beneficial when we talk about the programs here in a second. Tolerant turf types, we have a lot of flexibility with how we could use it as well. It's primarily been used in warm season turf grass, but we can use it in the summer months to control goosegrass and things like that on cool season turf types. But on our cool season turf types, we have to use the lower rate at the 21 ounces per acre. And then on warm season, we have anywhere from 21 to 32 fluid ounces. Here are your major weeds that we're controlling: grassy weeds, some broadleaf weeds, and then sedges, which is really nice. So kind of the two key times where we position this are sort of late summer or late spring, early summer to control those summer weeds, and then fall applications for POA. That's kind of the two times to talk about or think about tower. So we've all had to step up our game when it comes to POA control, and tower allows us to do that. Why is POA so difficult to control? So unlike other grassy weeds, tower germinates across a range of environmental conditions. So we sort of have that moving target when it comes to emergent. So it's kind of hard to time our applications. It doesn't always act like an annual plant. We do have perennial POA in situations where POA is surviving the summer. And so then they're, much larger plants when we're trying to control them in the fall. And so that makes overall management much more difficult. We also have very limited options in terms of postemergent products that are effective and that can go out on green turf. So that sort of limits us. And then obviously, we've had some major, changes in cultural practices over the years, which again can kind of impact POA competition and then also overall success of our programs. So whether it's things like phrase mowing, overseeding, all of those changes has sort of impact our approach to managing POA. And then finally, resistance is real. It's out there, and we have to have a plan for it when we're dealing or making our herbicide selections. And so really what this means is we're ending up in situations where we have to put more products in the tank. We have to shift our programs to either start earlier or, go longer. And so that can mean more expensive POA programs because every time you have to add another active to the tank, your costs go up significantly. And so all of that sort of plays in. So we've got resistance to pre-emergent herbicides in POA. So things like DNAs, and then also resistance to indaziflam. We've got resistance to our selective postemergents. So obviously that really limits our options for tank mixtures. We also have widespread resistance to Roundup, and there's been this history of using like little, spiking every application with Roundup, and over the years what that's done is given us widespread Roundup resistance. And so now we have, situations where we used to be able to go and spray Roundup on dormant turf grass and take out all the POA left. Now we can't even do that in a lot of locations. And so we're really running out of options. And all of these numbers are alarming because it makes what we pick and our options to control POA very challenging and very difficult. So when we talk about, POA, herbicide mixtures have become the new normal. And we're still kind of left with trying to figure out that ideal timing for them to be the most effective they can be. So when we talk about these POA applications, this is kind of the trigger point or the timing that we're going for. And sometimes it's harder to pinpoint this. But basically, your soil temperature at the 2-inch depth, you want to trigger when your soil temps are 66 degrees or cooler for a 7-day window. So average soil temps for a 7-day window. Plus you have some sort of added moisture in the soil. So whether that came from rain or irrigation, you've got to have some moisture there. And so that's our target timing. And then now we're going to talk about what you put in the tank to control it. So the cool thing about Tower is in addition to being a pre-emergent, it actually gives you post-emergent, early post-emergent activity on POA. And so we take advantage of that in POA programs. And so we can either pair it with other residual pre-emergents to expand the length of control, or we can pair it with post-emergent herbicides and wait a little bit later and make that application where we get a residual and that post knockdown. And so there's kind of two approaches there that you can use. So we designed this pre plus post POA defense program to kind of guide those herbicide selections. If you're interested in the program, you can ask your BASF sales rep. We have these little flyers, they're front and back flyers, and they have all the details about the program. Basically, we have a granular option, which I'm not going to talk about today, and then we have a liquid tank mix option. And it all centers around Tower. And so basically you put Tower in the tank, and then if you want added, annual winter weed control or extended residual, you can add pendulum aquacap to that tank. And then you have the option to put a post-emergent in the tank. So it's 3 things in the tank. We have a list of post-emergents that have been effective with Tower. And obviously, all of these may have individual baggage issues. And so depending on the turf type that you're going after, read those labels and make sure they're safe on your turf type, especially if you're down in Florida or you're growing some of those bermudagrass cultivars that just seem to be more sensitive to herbicides. Pay close attention to which of the posts you put in the tank. But basically, you put 3 things in the tank and you make 1 application of this tank mixture to give you season-long POA control. You wait a little bit later into that season because we have both the pre and the post at the same time. And so we can knock it all out at once and then give us the residual protection that we need. So we've been very successful with the single application approach. Some people like to make sequential applications, or you may also be in a situation like South Florida where you're really limited with the post-emerge you can put in the tank from a turf safety perspective. And so in that case, you may drop out the post and prefer to do 2 sequential Tower applications. And so we'll show examples of that. But this is kind of what it looks like. So 1 application of Tower does not give you long enough control for the whole season. So you either have to tank mix it or you have to do sequential apps. And so this is just showing you the difference with a solo Tower application, it runs out. 2 sequential applications giving you excellent control, as do, Tower plus post-emerge. So whether that's Curb, Princep, Katana, any of those mixtures have been incredibly successful. So some of the pictures you can see, even under heavy pressure, Tower provides excellent control of POA annua. And a lot of this is because Tower has been so underutilized for POA. We don't have resistance problems, and it's incredibly effective. Like I said, if you want to boost your residual activity or if you want to pick up other winter weeds, you can put something like pendulum in that tank mixture. You do not need the highest rate of pendulum to be effective. That 50 ounces is very effective, particularly when you do sequential applications. So excellent control. And you have this flexibility of picking a program or picking a tank mixture that works for your location. So everybody's got their favorite, but we just incorporate Tower into the mix to give you that pre plus post, bringing a new mode of action to your program, and really excellent control. So Jim Brosnan has done so much work. A lot of these pictures were from trials with him. Basically just showing how effective Tower can be in these POA programs. So to kind of summarize, these are the most popular options with Tower, what people have been doing. Either sequential Tower applications with or without pendulum aquacap. So making those applications about 4 to 6 weeks apart, October and November. Making a single application of that 3-way mix with Tower plus a post-emergent with or without pendulum One application, one and done, very effective. And so all of these are great choices. The most important thing with all of this is that your tower application, the last application you make, is out by December 1st or is out before your temperature is below 55 degrees, your soil temp below 55 degrees. So we do not put tower out in January, February, or March. And so remember that. Don't do it. You can get injury. If you're on real sensitive turf types like seashore paspalum, we have found that 3 applications of tower at the 21 ounces is the most effective, but also the safest option. So if you're down in Florida on paspalum courses, this has been a great option to incorporate tower and get complete control of POA with sequential applications. So some of the watch outs, I said, the 55 degrees tower, last application of tower no later than December 1st. As a conservative bet, do not apply tower January, February, March. Don't apply it to overly stressed turf. Don't put it out with a wetting agent or a soil surfactant. And then make sure you're not putting out any herbicides really, but in particular tower or pendulum within 14 days before or after of a mechanical disturbance. So whether that's aerification, verticutting, scalping, any of the mechanical disturbing practices, don't follow that up with a tower application. So that's POA. I urge you to consider tower for your POA programs. We have just seen a lot of success in the last few years, in particular with people who have switched to tower and have been really happy with it. So I don't have a lot of time. I was going to just mention briefly that tower also makes a great Ronstar alternative in the spring of the year to control not only crabgrass, but in particular goosegrass. And again, pay attention to those timing windows and really save your tower application for April or May. That kind of makes it, the most effective and the safest time to use it. But we can get as good of control as Ronstar. So especially as all those restrictions come down and you are in need of an alternative or a product that you can use in place of it, tower can be that option for you. It's very effective and it can go out on green, actively growing turf grass, which is great. So whether it's crabgrass we're trying to control, it's a fantastic option. And in particular, it's very good on goosegrass. And so again, tower, that's a great place to put it. So spring, late spring, fall, that's your time for tower. And you can pick and choose what's most important to you. Remember that you have 64 fluid ounces to play with for the year. So excellent control. We can also use tower on cool season turf in the summer. You just got to drop that rate down to 21 fluid ounces, but definitely underutilized on cool season turf, but it is an option, particularly if you want a little added residual in your goosegrass options or your goosegrass control programs. So with that, I think I will round it out with the fact that tower is incredibly flexible. We can get added control. And the biggest thing to remember is whenever you're putting out a postemergent for grassy weeds, tower is the perfect partner product for those applications. So whether it's Pylex, Drive Accelerate, any of those applications, put a shot of tower in there too to give you that residual activity, to give you added control, and then pick up some of those other weeds that oftentimes we miss because those summer applications, we have a lot of weeds that pop up in the late summer, and usually we're not putting out an herbicide that time of year or a preemergent that time of year that's giving us the protection that we need. So with that, Tower and Pylex, fantastic products. They're not scary products. They can be very effective and you can use them safely. You just got to pay attention to a few things, pay attention to your rates, pay attention to your timings. But they can be incredibly effective. and great additions to warm season programs, but then also even cool season programs in a variety of ways. So with that, I probably have a couple minutes to take questions, but otherwise, don't ever hesitate to reach out to your local BASF sales rep. They are always available to help, answer questions, and anything they can't answer, they can text or email me and I will help with that. So we're always around. If you want help, designing spray programs, we're available for that. Or if you just have questions about, how to incorporate either of these products or any of our other BASF products into your programs, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, I can take a couple questions or we can call it depending on our time. Thank you.
Emma, another amazing presentation. It's been a while since I've seen you either on a webinar or in person. Always a pleasure. We do have a few questions. We've got a couple minutes till the top of the hour. I know you've got some place to be at noon, so we can zip through these as quickly as you want. Gary asked, is Pylex not recommended for Dallas grass any longer?
Yeah, so we can still use Pylex for Dallas grass. So I had a couple pictures of showing that. So usually you need more than one application. You need sequential applications, usually 2 to 3 weeks apart. Definitely put your MSO with it, but yes, it can still be effective.
And that's a good lead into two different questions. One's from Kirk, one's from Keith. Kirk asked, was MSO used in these tank mixes? Sounds like it was. And then Keith asks, should I use MSO with Pylex and Sencor targeting goosegrass in celebration?
So we have a mixture. So there were a lot of the goosegrass trials did not have MSO, and some did have MSO. But actually, I showed a lot of stuff that did not include the MSO just to see this is what Pylex is bringing to the table. But for most of our applications, we always recommend MSO. Pylex plus Sencor, we've done it both ways, with and without. I think most people still say probably put it in there. But obviously remember, Sencor can get pretty hot, especially as you bump those rates up. So kind of pay attention to that and consider that. And maybe even consider, like, do you need it or not?
We've got one from Mark. There was a lot of talk, obviously, about the warm season and going into really December. Is the 3 chemical combo good for cool season as well?
So you would have to, look at each of those, each of the products that you're interested in putting in there and seeing what their turf tolerance is and if they have cool season turf types on the label. Most of the POA work we've looked at has been in warm season turf grass, because a lot of the cool season stands, they have mixtures of POA bent. And so sometimes when you start using Tower, you actually start taking out, too much of the POA, and people kind of get a little wary of that. So it really just depends what your stand is, what turf type you're applying it in. So maybe if you had like specifics, we can discuss options, offline, because yeah, a lot of it is targeted more so for a warm season, but we've had people doing Tower for POA control in cool season turf types, and they've been successful. It just really depends what your stand looks like and what your mix is.
Related to that, should have rolled this in with the last one. Sorry about that. Mark asks for sedge control in cool season, again with cool season, is there a good timing? Is there an optimal timing for spring applications?
Yeah, so you're really kind of looking at that early summer app, usually with sedges. And so that would be when you would use Tower, but you will need the 21 fluid ounces. And so I would consider doing sequential applications to expand that window a little bit. Usually sedges start germinating a little after, goosegrass and stuff like that.
And we have time for one more. As Emma said, if you have any more questions after the webinar, obviously reach out to your local BASF rep. But one more from Keith. Is it too late? And who knows with the weather right now, but is it too late to spray Pylex and Sencor targeting goosegrass in and around New Orleans, the Big Easy?
Um, I mean, maybe if you just did one application, you could get away with it. But the later you go, you just have to worry about that Bermuda not, or the warm season turf grass, just not recovering as quickly. So I think it kind of depends on the rates. Um, and then, yeah, like the later into the summer, you just run that risk. I think one application, you'd probably be fine. But we typically say like be a little conservative, with those apps, just so you don't get any, unwanted injury or lasting injury. Right now, you might still be fine.
Fantastic hour, Emma. Great to hear all this. I learned quite a bit. Emma Lookabaugh, Technical Service Specialist with BASF Professional and Specialty Solutions. Thank you so much.
Thanks.